Good morning, Tracy in Madison, Wisconsin. My name is Philip Rouleau with Roll Tract, and I'm going to quickly go over how to disassemble the Roll Tract, ratchet rake assembly for cleaning, and reassemble for sterilization. Now, the first thing to note here is that your rake plate is held onto your cable by a hub. This is an older design, and in this situation, we do not remove this rake plate from the cable for cleaning and sterilization. So step one for you is going to be to pull this cable down out of the spool. To do that, you hold this piece by the spool cap. So I've got my hand around the spool cap and not over the handle. If you have your hand over this handle, it can't spin and the cable will not be able to come out. So I'm going to pull on the cable. You see it's not coming out, so I locate the lever here and just switch it to the opposite side. And then I will be able to pull that cable down. You can see the handle is spinning. That's important. Okay, once the cable's all the way out, it's about 16 inches of exposed cable. The next step is going to be to remove the spool cap assembly. To do that, I hold this piece by the handle this time because I don't want the handle to spin. So I hold it like this. I usually have it pointing straight up, and I turn that spool cap counterclockwise all the way until I can lift it right off. Okay, the next step is going to be to remove the spool from the crank handle. Okay. Now you're going to separate the spool cap from the spool. Okay, so you have this here. Now no further disassembly is required of these pieces. Next, you will just pull the crank handle out of the gearbox. You can see the square hole there is where it'll go back into when we do reassemble it. But for now, separate these two pieces. And last, be sure that your lock knob is not opened all the way or closed all the way. And that's important. You want to make sure that it's somewhere right in between and has some play in it. So now your Roll Tract ratchet rake assembly is completely disassembled and ready for the cleaning process. After your retractor has completed the cleaning process, we are ready to reassemble it for sterilization. So step one is going to be to put your crank handle back into your gearbox. And if you remember, we had talked about a square hole is where the crank handle was coming out of. So of course you're going to want to put that crank handle back into the square hole. There's a round hole on the other side. Don't put it in that way, it won't fit. Okay, once you have those pieces assembled, you're ready to reassemble your spool and your spool cap cover. So you can see here that this cable sits right over the flat part of that spool. You can see the spool is round for the most part, but right where that cable comes out, it's flat. Now the key is to align this groove. You see a groove in your spool cap. You want to align that groove with the flat surface of your spool. So you take the flat surface of the spool and the groove and you put them together. So again, you have the flat surface, you have your groove, and they just slide together. It's important that they go together that way. Next thing that you're going to do, put your spool cap assembly onto your crank handle. Now you'll have a pin right here on your spool cap assembly. That pin is designed to go into this groove. So go ahead and slide that spool cap assembly onto your crank handle, making sure that the pin is in the groove. Now you hold those pieces together and you take your spool cap nut, put it on, turn it clockwise, and then hand tighten it as tight as you can get it. And then your next step is going to be to make sure this lock knob is not all the way opened or all the way closed. You want it to be somewhere right in the middle and have some play in it. That's very important. Now what we're going to do is to wind this cable up and leave about 2.5 to 3 inches exposed prior to sterilization. Now it's important to allow the cable to hang freely with the weight of the rake plate on the cable. So you can wind this cable up uniformly on the spool. If you let it sit on the table and you start winding it, you can see that the cable is kind of bent and it will not wind correctly on the spool. So it's a point that's often missed, but very important. Allow your rake plate to hang freely. If you're sitting at a table doing this, stand up and let it hang freely. And go ahead and wind your cable up into your spool and leave about 2.5 to 3 inches of cable exposed. Now your roll track ratchet rake assembly is reassembled and ready for sterilization.